Hi everyone, and welcome to our video on the commercial uses of plant hormones. This is part of our Module 5 Part 5 video series where we're looking at those plant and animal responses, and in this video we're having a look at specification reference 5.1.5F, the commercial uses of plant hormones. So first hormone we're going to look at is our old friend Auxins. Now, one of those commercial uses of auxins, and this is something you in theory heard about back in GCSE as well, is that they can be used as these selective herbicides or selective weed killers. Now, the reason that auxins can be used as a weed killer is because if we give plants a high enough concentration of auxin, then it just makes those plants have such a rapid rate of growth that the tissues just become very distorted. As a result of that distortion, the tissue is damaged and pathogens can enter those plants way more easily. So it works very well at getting rid of those broadleaf weeds on our lawns. So the reason it's selective is because it doesn't affect all plants. Things like your grasses should be absolutely fine, but any of those broader leaf things like dandelions, then they will be affected by that high concentration of auxin and eventually they are going to die. It is also worth mentioning here that since we've obviously been able to create auxins synthetically, so obviously they're the man-made ones, then those types of auxins are much harder for plants to break down. So it's quite advantageous to use a synthetic auxin versus a natural auxin as a weed killer, because as the plants struggle to break down the synthetic ones, they're going to be able to act for a longer period of time and therefore do a better job of killing those weeds on our lawns. The other place that we find auxins is in rooting powders. And the reason we find auxin in rooting powders is because it actually helps promote root growth. So when we are taking cuttings of our plants, obviously that is a way of producing large numbers of those identical clones, then we need them to grow roots quite quickly because obviously roots are how they're going to get the water and the minerals from the soil. So by dipping that cutting in a rooting powder that contains auxin before you then plant it in that moist compost, then it's going to have a better chance of growing those roots and therefore surviving. Another place we find our auxins is in parthenocarpy. Now, parthenocarpy is basically where we're going to produce seedless fruits. Think about the grapes you buy in pretty much every supermarket these days. Now, the way that this works is ordinarily, our plants will produce their little flowers, then a pollinator comes along, quite happily moves the pollen from one plant to another, and as a result, we are forming a seed. What we're doing in parthenocarpy is tricking the plant to all intents and purposes. We want it to think that it has been fertilized and therefore it then forms the fruit, but the reality is it hasn't. And the way we trick our plants is we just apply auxin to those unpollinated flowers. The plants then think that they have been pollinated, they then form the fruit, but because they weren't actually pollinated, there are no seeds inside, so seedless fruit. The next use of our auxins is in preventing both leaf abscission and fruit abscission. So remember, abscission is talking about the drop. So we're preventing leaf drop and fruit drop basically. And one of the main places we're using this is in our fruit orchards. Because if we spray fruit trees with auxin, then it's actually going to prevent that abscission of the fruits. So it prevents the fruit from falling off the tree. And hopefully we all know that fruit dropping off a tree from a great height isn't a good thing, because if you drop an apple, what happens? It bruises. Does anyone really want to buy bruised fruit? Not really. So what we find is by spraying those fruit trees with the auxin, it prevents the fruit from falling, and therefore you're avoiding those losses from the windfall, and you're also then able to harvest at one point in time. Very much efficient if we're looking at modern farming. The next plant hormone we're going to have a look at are the cytokinins. Now, cytokinins are going to be used in those instances where we want to delay leaf senescence. And this is probably the best example to do with lettuce. So lettuce is basically a whole bunch of leaves, and what we want to do is avoid those leaves going yellow, because again, when you're looking in the supermarket at what bits of fruit and veg you're going to buy, you're not buying the weird looking coloured one. If you're going to buy a lettuce, you're going to buy the nice green one. So we apply it to lettuce after picking, and the cytokinins are going to help prevent that yellowing. The other place that we can actually use our cytokinins is to actually promote bud and shoot growth from that parent plant tissue. And this is actually advantageous when we want to mass produce plants, because what we're going to end up generating is a short shoot with lots of side branches. And obviously those side branches can then be split off to form their own individual plants, which will all be obviously identical copies of that parent plant. So this allows us to mass produce plants where we know what we're going to get. Third hormone, the gibberellins. Now, gibberellins are all to do with commercial fruit production, really. So if we think about grapes first of all, we talk a lot about grapes in A-level biology, then the old style, the original grapes, are on the left. This is a bunch of grapes as they would grow pre-gibberellins being applied to them. So what you can see is they're quite densely packed in together. Now the reason for that is that without those gibberellins being applied to them, then the stalks are actually quite short. And that leads to obviously very densely packed grapes, which means they're not going to be able to grow very large because they're all pressing against each other. So what we worked out is if we actually apply gibberellins to our grapes, then the stalks get longer because the stalk is going to elongate. And because of that, the grapes have more space and so they grow larger. So purely by applying those gibberellins to our grapevines, we can then get larger grapes. Similar kind of thing happens with our apples. Again, we can apply the gibberellins to our apple trees, and that is going to lead to longer apples. So you can see the difference here. On the right, one without the gibberellin, on the left, one with the gibberellin. So we're making those longer apples, which is obviously more fruit that people would like to eat. The other thing it reduces is russeting. And again, you can see around the top, if you look here, you can see there's this little brown patch around the top. That's the russeting. And generally speaking, people don't like the look of it. And so we've worked out that in our commercial fruit production, if we can reduce the russeting, we make fruit that's more appealing to the masses to buy. The other area we'll find our gibberellins is in delaying senescence in those citrus fruits. And this is all about extending how long those citrus fruits can stay unpicked, and that means we will have those citrus fruits for a longer period of time. If obviously you have a short space of time that you've got to pick all those fruits, they're only going to last for a certain length of time and therefore reduces the availability of them in the shops. So delaying their senescence means they're going unpicked for longer and therefore longer availability. The other place we're going to see our gibberellins used is in brewing. Now, if we use gibberellins in brewing, it's going to speed up the germination of barley seeds because gibberellins break the dormancy of seeds, remember. So all we're going to do is we're going to apply the gibberellins to those barley seeds. They are going to start to germinate, and basically that means that the starch is going to be hydrolyzed into the maltose, and that's our sugar that's going into our particular beers that we're making. If we then think about sugarcane, one thing that we can do with our gibberellins there is spray the sugarcane with the gibberellin, and it's going to increase the yield of sugar because it's going to have those stems, so those regions of internodes, remember, actually get longer. So we get elongation of the internodes, and that means that we've got more sugar in those regions because the cells are bigger. The final hormone we're going to look at is ethene. Now, ethene is the one that we're going to use to speed up the ripening process. So we can ripen apples, tomatoes and citrus fruit much quicker by spraying them with ethene. It's the same kind of idea that if you've got a banana or a bunch of bananas, you shouldn't put them in your fruit bowl because the bananas are going to release ethene gas, and that ethene is then going to basically speed up the ripening of all of the other fruits sitting around in your fruit bowl and generally makes them spoil quicker. So keep your bananas away from your other fruits is the rule. The other places we can use it in terms of commercial factors is in terms of the cotton, the cherry and the walnut kind of industries, and it's all to do with spraying those crops with the ethene, and it then helps promote that fruit drop. So it's all about harvest there. If we think about cucumbers, by spraying our cucumber plants with ethene, it reduces that self-pollination, because cucumbers are wonderful little plants that can pollinate themselves. And again, if they're pollinating, they're producing these seeds, and they don't really want a whole load of seedy cucumbers. Not particularly nice. And the last one there is if we're thinking about the flower industry, then we can use ethene to promote that lateral growth, which means we get these compact flowering stems. So what we're going to have is basically a shorter stem with a lot of flowers on it, which is just more attractive in the grand world of flowers. It is important to bear in mind that when we've actually picked the fruit, then it's not just a case of we just chuck it in a box and then just send it off around the world. Because remember, these days, food comes from all over the shop, quite large distances in a number of cases. And what we need to do is obviously make sure that during that transit, it doesn't spoil. So once that fruit has been picked from wherever in the world it has been grown, then it's going to be stored at low temperatures with an atmosphere that's got low oxygen and high carbon dioxide. And the whole idea of that is it's then going to prevent the synthesis of ethene in those fruits. Because remember, if we've got ethene, it's promoting that ripening process. So that means that because we're storing at those low temperatures, high carbon dioxide, low oxygen atmosphere, we're not going to get much ethene being produced, and therefore it means we can ship them bigger distances, because it's going to take them longer to ripen. And bananas are a great example of this, so that we can have all these green bananas arriving in our stores even though they were picked quite some time ago in a country far, far away. As always, I hope you found our video useful today, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can see when the next video is uploaded, and of course head on over to the website to find an array of other resources to help you in your A-level biology studies.